They say the executioner is just a blade, a detached instrument of the law. But what if the law demanded acts so cruel, so utterly devoid of humanity, that the act of carrying them out shattered the man holding the axe? Forget history lessons. This is not a tale of justice, but a descent into the dark heart of the Middle Ages, where men became machines of terror, and sometimes, the monsters they killed were less monstrous than the death they inflicted. We're counting down the 10 most gruesome executions ever performed by the official hand. And the final one, it didn't just end a life. It ended the sanity of the man ordered to perform it. Before we unlock this horrifying history, a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe if you want more deep dives into the shadows of the past, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We want to know where our history buffs are. Let's begin the countdown at number 10. François Ravaillac, the Kingslayer, dissected by draft horses. Paris, May 1610. The scorching sun blazes down on the place de Grève, reflecting the white-hot fury of France upon one man. François Ravaillac, a penniless clerk with a name soon to be forever stained, had dared to assassinate King Henry IV in broad daylight. Now he stands exposed, stripped to the waist, fully aware he is about to become an exhibit of state wrath unlike any other. For 2 agonizing days, he had already endured the red-hot tongs, tearing his flesh to ribbons. Today, the horrific finale commences. His right hand, the regicidal instrument, is first incinerated with burning sulfur. The nauseating stench of smoldering flesh blankets the square, yet not a single spectator flinches. Then they arrive. For horses, ropes tethered to his limbs, pulling in 4 opposing directions. The tension mounts, muscles straining, bones groaning under the force, but the sinews hold. Soldiers lash the beasts until a sickening, wet rupture echoes through the crowd. Something rips, then it tears again and again. When the spectacle finally ends, only fragments and ash remain. His very name is expunged from all registers, his home leveled, his family banished. France yearned to obliterate the memory, but the gallows and the scaffold do not smother beliefs. They ignite them, and across the border in Germany, the next condemned soul is already anticipating the wheel. An executioner awaits, ready to fulfill his grim duty with chilling, mechanical accuracy. Let's move to number 9, Peter Neers, the diabolical necromancer. The 42-stroke massacre. The stench of drying blood and raw terror fouled the air in the Neumarkt execution grounds. The year was 1581, and the man infamously known as the Devil's Wrecker was beginning his death sentence. Peter Neers, robber, black sorcerer, and alleged cannibal. For 2 decades, he had haunted the countryside, murdering travelers and even pregnant women to harvest their bodies for perverse magical rituals. It was rumored he used the tiny hearts of unborn infants as offerings to the infernal lord himself. When authorities finally captured him, they found 24 severed human hands in his possession, conclusive evidence of a living hell. Under intensive questioning, he confessed to 544 murders. But to the roaring mob, only one number mattered: 42. This was the precise number of bludgeoning strikes he was sentenced to endure on the breaking wheel. At dawn, the barbarity began. Hammers methodically pulverized his limbs one by one. Bones splintered like dried, brittle timber. Screams of unbearable pain ricocheted across the plaza. The onlookers counted every strike aloud 42 times, until his form was nothing but an agonizing mass. He was then secured to the wheel, his broken arms and legs twisted unnaturally backward. He hung there, half dead, half pleading, while birds of prey circled and landed on him. In the Holy Roman Empire, this wasn't an outrage. It was the required legal standard. Justice was designed to be witnessed, felt, and unforgettable. For days, his mangled remains served as a grotesque public display, a grim admonition to anyone who thought malevolence could roam freely. But as Neumarkt reeked of burnt offerings, a vastly different pyre was being prepared in Rouen. One not intended for a monster, but for a saint. Next up is number 8, Joan of Arc, the warrior saint consumed by fire. Rouen, 1431. The haze of smoke was already obscuring the tolling of the bells. In the heart of the marketplace stood a young woman, barely 19, shackled but unbowed. Her name was Joan of Arc, the celebrated Maid of Orleans. She had inspired armies, liberated cities, and installed a king. Now she faced the pyre alone, set ablaze by the very officials who had once kneeled before her. Before we continue, a small request. If you enjoy this content, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 99% of you watch the videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could achieve if everyone subscribed. Costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. And if you have any hype left this week, please use it for this video and help us climb the leaderboard. Done already? Awesome. Thanks. Moving on. The official charge was heresy. She heard voices, they declared, of angels and saints that led her into battle. To the church, it was pure sacrilege. To the populace, it was a divine miracle. When the executioner applied the torch to the wood, her only request was for a crucifix. A kind soldier quickly lashed 2 sticks together and passed it to her. The fire consumed her garments. Smoke and fervent prayers ascended simultaneously to the heavens. Eyewitnesses recounted. She cried out for Jesus until the roar of the fire completely muffled her voice. But what the flames failed to consume was her conviction. They only destroyed her body, instantly guaranteeing her immortality. When the blaze subsided, nothing but ashes remained, yet a powerful legend had been forged. Her destroyers had, in effect, created a saint, and while the embers still glowed faintly in Rouen, a separate kind of fiery death was being organized across the English Channel. One fueled not by piety, but by vengeful rage. Here is number 7, Georgi Daza, the peasant king on a throne of flames. He yearned for fairness and perished on a blazing throne. In 1514, Georgi Daza, a Hungarian nobleman who had turned into a revolutionary leader, commanded the largest peasant revolt in Central European history. What began as a religious crusade against the Ottomans swiftly spiraled into a devastating war against his own aristocracy. Tens of thousands, farmers, priests, and common townspeople, rallied to his cause. They wore simple wooden crosses, carried farm tools, and possessed an unshakable belief that God was their ally. But the divine silence was deafening. After months of turmoil and burning settlements, the entrenched nobles crushed the uprising. Daza was captured near Timișoara, and his ensuing punishment was designed to inflict more fear than any battle. The tribunal ordered him seated upon a throne made of glowing, red-hot iron. They forcibly pressed a crown of molten metal onto his head and placed a blazing scepter in his hand, a savage mockery of the royal status he had briefly claimed. Witnesses testified that Daza remained upright, even as the metal seared his skin and flesh. His lips did not tremble. Then, soldiers herded in his captured followers, starving, defeated, and broken. They were forced to tear chunks of flesh from Daza's body, a sickening ritual they called the King's Feast. Some followers died from sheer horror, and others were driven insane. The body burned, but the central idea lived on. Daza was physically erased, yet his name evolved into a powerful symbol of resistance to tyranny. And long before him, 2 centuries earlier, another man had carried the same dream. A Scottish patriot who fought for his people's liberty and paid for it with the ultimate sacrifice. This brings us to number 6, William Wallace, the man England carved into pieces. On August 23, 1305, Smithfield, London, was a dense ocean of faces. Drums beat a heavy, monotonous rhythm as a man was dragged across the cobblestones, covered in chains, grime, and nearing death. William Wallace, the outlaw who had ignited Scotland's passion for freedom. His name was simultaneously a curse word and a battle cry. Feared in England, idolized in Scotland. 8 years prior, in 1297, he had achieved the impossible at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Leading farmers and volunteers, he utterly routed an English army twice their size. But that triumph made him the most wanted man alive. In 1305, he was betrayed near Glasgow, captured, and handed over to King Edward I, a monarch who exemplified pitilessness. The ensuing trial was a pure sham, an act of English vengeance, despite Wallace having never pledged allegiance to any English sovereign. The death sentence was sealed long before the first word was uttered. Stripped naked and in heavy iron restraints, he was dragged by horses through London streets for a mile. The crowd roared its approval as he was delivered to the execution site. He was hanged until the brink of death, then swiftly cut down to prolong the agony. The executioner sliced open his abdomen, pulled out his entrails, and incinerated them before his own eyes. Finally, the axe fell. His head was mounted on London Bridge, and his limbs were distributed to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. A terrifying communication carved in bone and blood. Thus ended the hope of immediate freedom. For England, justice was believed to be served. For Scotland, a lasting hero was born. His final utterance echoes across the centuries. Freedom. A simple word that made powerful empires tremble. But not every legend born on the scaffold is honorable. In Germany, another condemned man awaited his fate. One labeled not a hero, but a true beast. On to number 5, Peter Stumpf, the werewolf of Bedburg's last howl. In 1589, the village of Bedburg near Cologne fell silent. Not a bird stirred as people jammed into the marketplace to witness the demise of a man who had become pure myth. Peter Stumpf, farmer, widower, father, and the subject of the horrific new title, The Werewolf of Bedburg. For months, hunters had been discovering gruesomely mutilated bodies near his property. Children, women, passing travelers. No one felt safe anymore. Soon, insidious rumors began to spread that the killer was not human, but a fiend blending wolf and demon. When Stumpf was finally apprehended, the torture made everything pour out. He confessed to 31 murders, an unholy pact with Satan, and described a magical girdle that transformed him into a predatory animal. For panic does not seek truth. It demands a scapegoat, and Stumpf became that perfect face of fear. His execution was an unparalleled horror show. The executioner secured him to a wooden wheel, used fire-heated tongs to systematically tear the flesh from his body. The executioner secured him to a wooden wheel, used fire-heated tongs to systematically tear the flesh from his body. Then, he shattered his limbs with a heavy iron bar until not one bone remained whole. Above him was displayed a carved wooden wolf's head, ensuring no one would forget what fear does to common people. Yet, the cruelty did not cease with him. His daughter and his mistress were executed alongside him that very day, accused of complicity in his unnatural acts. The city reeked of blood and scorched wood when the ordeal was finished. Weeks later, illustrated pamphlets appeared in London, Amsterdam, and Paris. Detailed accounts of the werewolf of the Rhine. The narrative exploded across Europe, and with it, the pervasive idea that true evil resides not only in wild beasts but also within the hearts of men. Still, not every execution of the era was purely about bloodletting. Across the sea, in the grey, damp air of England, other lives were extinguished, more quietly, but with a calculated cruelty that chilled the soul. Our next entry, number 4, is Margaret Clitheroe, the woman who chose to be crushed by 700 pounds of silence. York, 1586. The narrow, shadowed streets of the shambles smelled of damp straw and wood smoke. Inside a tiny dwelling, Margaret Clitheroe was kneeling, lost in prayer. She knew they were coming. For years, she had been a haven for banned Catholic priests, secretly hosting the illegal mass while the Queen's spies scoured Elizabethan England for papists. Harboring a priest was a treasonous act punishable by hanging. Yet, she made a fierce vow. She would not grant them the satisfaction of a public execution. Her house concealed a priest hole, a space barely large enough for a man to hide. When the officers finally breached the wall, they uncovered vestments, sacred chalices, and irrefutable proof of high treason under the current English statutes. Margaret was 33, a butcher's wife, and a mother to 3 children. The court relentlessly demanded a confession, but she met their demands with absolute silence. With terrifying composure, she simply declared, "I will be judged by God, not by men." This refusal to speak sealed her fate. On March 25th, she was taken to the Tolbooth prison. A heavy wooden door was laid out on the floor, and she was forced to lie beneath it. A razor-sharp stone was positioned strategically beneath her spine. Then, the executioners began piling enormous weights onto the door over her chest. 700 pounds, witnesses estimated. The first sound was the sickening crack of her ribs. She bit her tongue hard, refusing to let a single cry escape her lips. 15 minutes later, she was dead. Her body was secretly interred, but her hand was preserved, guarded as a holy relic. 2 centuries later, the church declared her a martyr. In 1970, she was officially canonized as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. But her slow death by stone was merely one single horror in an entire ocean of cruelty. For soon after, another man was punished for a different crime with an even more bizarre and gruesome method. He was condemned to end up in boiling oil. If you find this descent into dark history compelling, please click the like button below. It helps us keep these stories from being forgotten. Let's move to number 3, Richard Roos, the chef who perished in his own potage. London, 1531. Smithfield Market was a confluence of odors. Fresh bread, butcher smoke, and an unspoken, rising dread. A crowd had gathered, buzzing with disbelief. They were about to witness a man literally boiled alive. His name was Richard Roos, a cook employed in the household of John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester. His capital offense, murder by poison. The horror began with a simple serving of porridge. Roos had laced the meal prepared for the bishop's guests. 2 victims died in excruciating agony. Fisher himself barely survived. Under the newly passed law of Henry VIII, poisoning was categorized as high treason, an act to be punished not by hanging or the axe, but by immersion in boiling water. The law's purpose was to be a shocking and unforgettable deterrent. The executioner placed Roos inside a gigantic, custom-made cauldron of violently boiling liquid. According to the court chronicler Edward Hall, he thrashed, screamed, and fought desperately to climb out. Guards forcefully shoved him back down with large iron poles. 3 times he was hoisted up, 3 times he was plunged back in, until his body finally gave out. No executioner before or after ever employed this penalty again. This grotesque statute had been enacted just weeks prior, specifically to deal with Roos's crime. Henry intended to make an absolute example of him, a terrorizing warning to any servant who might consider transforming their master's food into a deadly trap. Richard Roos became the first and last person to die by judicial boiling under English law. The statute was repealed just 16 years later. But almost a century earlier, another execution ended just as quietly, yet with no less cruelty. A young noblewoman was drowned in a river on the cruel command of her lover's father. How could the pure force of love become so tragically dark that the water itself was repurposed as a deadly weapon? On to number 2. Agnes Bernauer, the commoner swallowed by the Danube. Spring, 1435. The river Danube flowed with deceptively calm clarity, but its waters were about to be witness to a royal decree steeped in cold malice. On the bank near Straubing stood Agnes Bernauer, bound and encircled by grim-faced soldiers. She was the beautiful daughter of a humble Augsburg barber, a commoner who had committed the ultimate transgression. She had captured the heart of a prince. Her devoted lover was Duke Albert of Bavaria, the direct heir to a formidable European dynasty. Their secret marriage sent shockwaves through the court. For Albert, it was true love. For his father, it was an intolerable act of betrayal. No peasant was ever to sit upon the Bavarian throne, and so the fatal judgment was delivered without a formal trial or any chance for defense. On October 12, 1435, Agnes was forcibly taken to the Danube by her captors. She was ruthlessly tied to a thick wooden beam and thrown into the churning current. The powerful river swallowed her completely within a matter of minutes. Medieval chronicles recount her final prayers, whispered as the cold water stole her life. Her end was agonizing, yet her spirit of defiant love did not perish with her. But Agnes's drowning was not the first instance of a faith being publicly and violently silenced. Just 20 years earlier, a radical Czech priest had been burned at the stake, and his execution had become the spark that ignited a catastrophic war. If you're still watching, you have a strong stomach. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's darkest corners. Now we turn to number 1. Jan Hus, the flame that set all of Bohemia ablaze. Constance, July 6, 1415. The cathedral courtyard was packed tight with hundreds of powerful clergymen, nobles, and armed soldiers. The air hung heavy with the smells of ritual oil and pervasive fear, and at the center stood Jan Hus, a priest from Prague, heavily chained, wearing a mocking paper crown painted with demonic figures. He had traveled to the council under a promise of safe conduct. But his powerful sermons, fierce critiques of the church's corruption, a demand for clerical humility, and a warning against buying salvation, had made him a dangerous enemy. His growing legions of followers filled the streets of Prague, their defiant chants echoing across Europe. The church formally branded him a heretic. The judges read the comprehensive list of charges. Hus managed a faint smile and replied, "I would not abandon the truth even for a cathedral roofed in pure gold." The verdict was undeniable. That afternoon, the secular authorities took custody of him for his execution. The pyre was fully stoked, the flames leaping and hungry. Hus began singing a hymn in his native Czech, his voice unervingly steady even as the dense smoke began to envelop his body. Minutes later, his life was extinguished. His ashes gathered and scattered into the Rhine to erase his memory. But the fire of his words could not be put out. Within 2 years, his death triggered the devastating Hussite Wars, one of the most brutal religious conflicts of the 15th century. The council succeeded in silencing one defiant man, but across Bohemia and beyond, a revolutionary fire had been truly kindled, a blaze that would reshape generations to come. These 10 executions are merely the introduction to the vast, terrifying history of medieval horror. Each of these victims left indelible marks that echo centuries later. But the darkest narratives of history often reside hidden beneath the surface, and they are frequently more horrific than you can imagine. If you were gripped by this video and are ready for more, please give us a decisive like, subscribe to the channel right now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing.